The shuttle approached the large anchorage station slowly without issue. Wyatt had been contacted by the station a few minutes ago, giving him a vector trail to their destination, the Noir Navio. Watching through the monitor's screen, the pilot couldn't help but feel awestruck again upon seeing the marvelous black ship. The hull was almost entirely dark, its surface reflecting the light from the station and the distant star rather dimly. He could still remember vividly what it felt like to command that vessel. It had been an otherworldly experience that was overshadowed by the pure pleasure he felt when the Drazen cruiser was destroyed. The spear-tip-shaped vessel was, again, marvelous to behold. Ever since capturing the ship and taking it away from Caiston hands, his time had been consumed by training, adapting, and more than he would have liked to spend in a medical bay one way or another. In fact, he was starting to grow a not-so-insignificant amount of distaste for medical procedures that kept him bound, though he understood their necessity. But now he could admire the ship more closely. The design was elegant and organic, with no room for fanciful aesthetics. It was purely functional, though such simplicity made it beautiful to his eyes. The two short wings, compared to the length of the vessel, that is, that sprung near its rear, served no practical purpose other than to house more compartments, aiding the structural design of the ship that had allowed him to use its mobility in his favor during the battle against the Drazen. For a destroyer class, it was on the average size of one, as it measured 1,832 meters in length, a kilometer in width if measured from wing to wing, and a mere 200 at the tip due to the demands of the spinal-mounted pulse beam. Similarly, in height, the situation repeated itself, but nowhere near as pronounced, with the ship 442 meters at its thickest, central point that housed within the powerful tri-reactor plasma core. Over the length of the vessel, the gradual smoothing was less evident and also ended on the tip, making a perfect 200-meter-in-diameter cylinder ready to spew its deadly charge. While some could see the ship as bulky or unappealing in design, he personally couldn't see a more perfect ship. Not only was it a technological marvel, especially when compared to the standards set in the Principality, but it was made to strike from the shadows with deadly force and sweep back into the hiding for another run. When I commanded it, I felt like I was one with the ship. It felt like when I'm inside the cockpit of a fighter, but more intense. I could almost feel it move with every command I issued, every turn, every acceleration and deceleration, the power when firing the pulse beam. Everything was so otherworldly. Is that what being a Commodore, Captain, and above feels like? To sit on that chair and be one with the ship? If so, then I envy Commander Redford and Admiral Damien, to be able to enjoy the vastness of space from that perspective all the time. Yes, I envy such a position, Wyatt thought to himself, smiling gently at the Noir Navio. Look at it, so pristine and black, like polished obsidian, a black shimmering pearl set against the blackness of space. Wyatt paused for a moment, and his smile faded slowly. You commanded it through Cynthia's clever use of a loophole in a dire situation, Wyatt. You killed Drazen, you saved people's lives, and Clara was safe. Let that be enough. To experience such a thing as a commoner is more than I ever could have hoped for. Let that be enough. Even if I'm not a commoner anymore, that doesn't change what I am, he thought, content with the resolution even if it wasn't satisfying. Beautiful ship, isn't it? Clara's voice cut through the silence, and Wyatt turned his attention to her. Oh, that didn't startle you? You were so focused on the screen that I thought you'd at least jump a little. It seems I'll have to try harder, said the princess with a serene smile on her lips. Your sense of humor is peculiar, Clara, Wyatt replied. So says the man that's a stick in the mud, Cynthia added with a playful smirk. Do you see me as a means to measure the depth of muddy terrain? Wyatt asked, genuinely confused at her choice of words. No, that's not what, Cynthia replied in puzzlement while Clara let out a short, undignified snort. No, Wyatt, a stick in the mud is a phrase used to describe a person with a dull or boorish personality. Wyatt shrugged. Weskel would agree with you. He always said that I didn't know how to have fun. Be that as it may, Wyatt, what were you pondering about so intently? Clara asked with interest. Wyatt turned to the screen before replying. I was just admiring the Noir Navio. I've caught glimpses of it, but I never had the chance to observe it in detail. It has also occurred to me that I've only traveled between 3 different decks. There's still so much to see of it. He paused, taking a second to admire the ship on his screen. You're right, Clara, it is a beautiful ship. Deadly, too. You should know, Cynthia pointed out, her tone serious. Whoever built it managed to compact the firepower of a battlecruiser and the utilities of a battleship to the size of a destroyer. According to our own measurements, it is an assault destroyer, but no other assault destroyer across the Principality could come close to match it. Speed, armor, shields, durability, power, versatility. Even the exalted virtue would be hard-pressed to match it in an even fight following the rules of engagement. But the Nornavio is not built for them. Silent, decapitating strikes are what this ship was built for, but it isn't defenseless either if it must take action outside its intended role, Clara listed, her tone switching to her colder, more calculative side. This boogeyman hull plating is also intriguing. It may be fragile, but its stealth capabilities vastly outstrip any potential armor grading it could be placed in its stead. The blonde woman unhooked her safety belt and moved closer to Wyatt, standing next to him as she pointed a finger at the rear of the Nornavio. See those edges that mask the engines? Those are there to hide the plume as long as we're not moving too fast or too close to a target. That aside, Wyatt, can you see the radiators anywhere? What is she playing at? Wyatt thought to himself a moment before answering. They're located on the bottom of the ship, but remain locked away unless needed, correct? And why is that? Clara pressed on. Because the boogeyman system radiates excess heat slowly but constantly all the time. It works similarly to how many other types of hulls deal with excess heat, but it does it better and without giving itself to regular sensors. Unless the ship is engaging in an active fight causing the heat levels to accumulate faster than what the hull can radiate off, Wyatt replied, then pondered for a second with a brief hum. Does the ship have heat sinks? When I read the specifications of the Nornavio, I didn't read anything related to heat sinks. There are heat sinks located across the warp drive, the reactor, the weaponry, and the pulse beam cannon. The Nornavio can run very, very hot. Enough to burn everyone in it if a conflict runs for too long. The heat sinks will absorb some of it, but it will eventually overheat under the command of a reckless captain, Clara explained. Which, if you are willing, Wyatt, could you tell me what were you going to do if you hadn't passed out during the assault against the Drazen? Clara makes a good point, and I must confess that I, too, am curious to know what were you planning to do, Wyatt, Cynthia added. Wyatt felt a thrilling wave of tingling pleasure at being reminded of the incident once again. Even if he never got to face Drazen ever again, that battle and the experiences he gained from it were etched into his memory for the rest of his life. With pleasure, he began, his voice reflecting his good mood. After the cruiser was destroyed, I planned on peeling away from them and getting at least one of their remaining destroyed to get near us before entering weapons range. I would then put the Nornavio into a slow spin and engage the enemy with railgun and plasma fire. Once the shields were down, use the heavy laser turrets to strike their center and hopefully destroy their bridge deck. After that, I don't know what I would have done or how I would have reacted to their counter-assaults. Everything was happening so fast, so I just did what came naturally to me. I'm certain that's true, Wyatt. You are not the kind of man to formulate convoluted strategies. At least not outside the thick of combat, and you showed them no mercy. I'm certain you would have gone after them when they made their move to escape the system, Cynthia pointed out. Most likely, yes, Wyatt agreed. There was no point in denying that, if given the chance, he would have made sure every single last Drazen on Gintrax would burn in a fire. As his mind went back to that momentous occasion, he remembered other pieces of information. After a moment of silence, he turned to Clara. Clara, may I ask you something? You may. I've been thinking about it after I got my implant since I didn't have much else to do. Since we were heading to Finnegan territory, why did you barter for Uriel Hoax's ships? Facing another Caiston force was a possibility, but even so, highly unlikely. His Majesty the Prince, your brother, now has access to greater forces. Was it part of your plan? Will the destroyers and freighters you gained form part of your fleet? He asked, and was confused when Clara let out an amused giggle before placing a hand on his shoulder. My dear Wyatt, those ships were never my goal. Woodshaft was the prize I was after. The personnel we gathered up along the way was part of what I was striving to achieve. Frankly, I am still disappointed that I have no real fighting ground and boarding forces. In their favor, though, the leader of the mercenaries under my command, one Commander Francesco Arcadi, is a rather enthusiastic and competent man. I'm sure his forces will prove their worth." The princess replied, and Wyatt smiled internally, noting the not-so-enthusiastic tone behind the otherwise encouraging words of the blonde, purple-eyed woman. "Then, if Woodshaft was your goal, why deal for the ships at all? Diplomacy and negotiations are dangerous battlefields, Wyatt. I did not lie to Uriel when I said I could have easily replaced him. Had he shown incompetence or overt greed, I would have ordered his execution. But Uriel Holks is an intelligent and competent man. The ships bartered will be used as refitted transports and be integrated into the forces of the fleets present as logistical and support ships. Deities know we need capable ships to press against my uncle's forces," Clara explained, pausing for a moment, her eyes gleaming with intent before continuing. "You see, Wyatt, my goal was to achieve Woodshaft primarily as a distraction. The station is vast and a strategic position for both House Finnegan and Caiston. Now that they are not a mere smuggler den but a commercial hub under the recognition of House Astor, the only way for House Caiston to reclaim it for themselves will be through a large military force or with the use of Third Fleet elements. But Cornelius Tigan won't be able to spare his forces whilst in conflict with Finnegan and other loyalist forces." Letting go of his shoulder, she returned to her seat as they approached their destination. "And while Woodshaft stands, we have eyes inside Caiston territory and a potential staging point for our forces if need be." Did she plan all of it from the start? Wyatt thought as a shudder of fear and not a small amount of respect and admiration flowed through him. Making future plans was decidedly not one of his strengths, but Clara was capable of formulating a dozen different plans with laughable ease. "Is she a genius because she's an Astor, or is it her natural talent?" he asked himself, not sure which answer was more terrifying. Sad as it was, the Drazen assault cemented Uriel Hoax's opinion and gained us his appreciation, if not his loyalty, Cynthia added pragmatically. "Tragically," Wyatt replied, agreeing with the blue-haired woman. "Say, Wyatt, aren't you curious about what happened to Salazar Reed?" Cynthia asked with a knowing tone. "Not really," the pilot replied without hesitation. "Unless his name is Serhan Gimor, I don't hold grudges without merit. What he did was no different from what I expect from petulant blue bloods." "What he did was almost worthy of praise were it not for his intended goals," Clara exclaimed, and a cold laugh escaped her lips. "Using his knowledge against you, he sent you a peace gauntlet hoping you'd reject the gesture. Since he couldn't kill you for your crime, he opted to show he was better than you." Her lips curled into a smirk. "Sadly for him, he fell short of his own expectations and ended up humiliated in turn." Vice Admiral Vashakati Reed was not pleased with the actions of his nephew, Cynthia continued with a smirk. "He didn't send a formal apology. He has to save face somehow for the sake of his house, but he stripped Salazar from his noble title, reducing him to a mere knight with no authority within his house. He was lucky he wasn't exiled for his actions and his defeat. To make matters worse for him, my sister was not gentle either." Wyatt winced at the sadistic tone Cynthia's tone took during that last sentence. He didn't know Commander Juliana anywhere near as well as Cynthia, but he knew she was a woman of unquestionable loyalty and valued it above all else. "What did she do to him?" he asked as his curiosity won. "After receiving 20 public lashings, she demoted him from captain to sergeant. Marine ranks work in a different system than Royal Navy ones, but effectively, he won't be able to command anything but auxilia forces ever again. His reputation has been ruined, his standing crushed, and those close to him have abandoned him. In a rather cruel decision even by the standards set by my sister, she has transferred him to the Noir Navio." "Isn't that dangerous? What if he tries to hurt you or Clara? What if he turns traitor?" Wyatt asked, worried. "He has no option but to lower his head and take his punishment. Vashakati made it clear that if he heard any further offense caused by Salazar, he would be stricken from the family records, made pariah, and likely killed or exiled in full disgrace. House Reed can be brutish, but they are loyal to the prince," Cynthia clarified. "To a noble of a storied house such as House Reed, there is no greater punishment and threat. He'll likely seek an honorable death in combat before the thought of betrayal crosses his mind." "If you say so, I shall trust you, Cynthia," Wyatt replied sincerely. She was the experienced noble of the two, after all. His attention turned to the monitor as the computer signaled that the docking procedure was about to commence. He watched as the hangar of the Noir Navio opened in the distance, illuminating the otherwise black exterior with the blue hue of a kinetic shield. A request for communication came through, and a second later he accepted it. "This is Communications and Navigational Officer Galt Tyrome. Proceed to the hangar's Section A Shuttle NTS-001, over." "Officer Galt Tyrome, this is Shuttle NTS-001. I read you loud and clear. Proceeding to your directions, over," Wyatt replied, glad to hear the voice of the red-haired man. I still need to thank him for helping me. What do you even give a noble as a gift?" "Understood, Shuttle NTS-001. We await the arrival of Her Majesty with great anticipation, over and out," Galt said before ending the connection. "I'm glad that you countermanded my orders in that last moment, Wyatt. Galt Tyrome has proven himself to be reliable and a good bridge officer. He had to be demoted, but I believe he prefers it. The rest of the crew have also saved me the headache of finding competent bridge personnel. Small blessings truly are a joy when they arrive at your side, don't they?" Clara said with a barely perceptible smile. "How does she keep doing that? It's like she can read my mind, but I've never heard of something like that before. Not even in the most outlandish rants Mr. Warlow went on and on when he was drunk," Wyatt thought, and glanced at Clara, who in turn didn't do anything to indicate that she could do anything of the sort. Choosing to blame his imagination, he focused on the task at hand as they approached the Noir Navio, the ship growing in size as they approached until even the hangar bay overtook the view of his primary cameras. The moment they passed through the kinetic shield, the bay began to close while he landed on the spot two Econtis were using guiding batons. The shuttle landed softly, and with a dying rumbling from the engines, the trip ended. Two large mechanical arms secured the shuttle in place as the trio put on their helmets and waited until the hangar was pressurized once again. With a loud ping, Wyatt moved to the door and opened it, stepping aside to let Cynthia step out first, followed by Clara, aided by her best friend. Finally, Wyatt followed, and they were soon joined by Captain Milcades, taking his spot next to Cynthia. He was not at all surprised to see 4 Royal Marines stationed close to the shuttle, waiting in their silent, vigilant way. "I'm glad to be back aboard a ship," Wyatt commented, relieved. The hangar was fairly empty, with only a few technicians, staff members, and engineers going about fully suited running diagnostics on the available shuttles, drones, and fighters. Now the question was, what was he to do now? The Noir Navio wouldn't leave until several hours later. He wasn't tired, so sleeping was not an option. He was feeling hungrier than usual, though, but it wasn't mealtime yet, and he had no desire to train until they were on their way out. So unless Redford or Clara ordered him to do something, he had nothing to do. "There you are!" The translated voice of a certain Nikanti rang through his channel, and he turned to his left, seeing Jincho approaching with vivid enthusiasm. "I've been looking everywhere for you, worm-brain. Come, you have to see your fighter." Suddenly he turned to Clara. "Princess, I'm taking the worm-brained maniac to see his fighter. Glad to see you back, though. Now get moving, maniac." With that said, he turned around and made his way off without waiting for an answer. Did he hack my communicator?" Clara's voice was heard through an open channel. "He hacked us all, my princess," Milcades replied dryly, but there was an edge of respect in his voice. "I didn't detect his intrusion until it was done. Impressive." "Should I reprimand him, my princess?" Cynthia asked, unmoved. "Certainly not. He's even better than what I expected. Such talent shows immense potential. I wonder why he was in Woodshaft in the first place with such talent at his disposal," the princess pondered. "His attitude leaves much to be desired," Cynthia commented. "True. Regardless, I think I like him. He shows not even an ounce of respect, but he's not malicious either. Yes, I believe I will come to like this rambunctious Yikanti," Clara said in a playful tone. For his part, Wyatt could almost feel Cynthia roll her eyes, and for some reason he was sure Captain Milcades was trying not to chuckle. "Wyatt, why are you still here? Aren't you going to see your fighter?" she asked in that same tone. "As you command, my princess," Wyatt replied, defeated but content. Giving the blonde princess a short-lived salute, he moved to follow the now distant Yikanti. When he caught up to him, he glanced back to see his friends leave, escorted by the Royal Marines. Friends. It still feels so odd to say that, like a bad rash that doesn't go away no matter how much you scratch it. But in a good way, Mom is never going to believe I befriended a princess and a lady of House Winfield. Dad's probably going to faint. Wham is never going to let me forget it. And Weskel is probably going to be a pain about it. The pilot thought of his family's potential reaction, earning a warm, wide smile underneath his helmet. When he caught up with Jincho, they were near a fighter that, true to Jincho's boasting, looked as good as new. Had to replace entire systems. The right wing was torn asunder. How it didn't shear off during your crazy maneuvers, I still don't know. Electrical was blown. You somehow managed to turn your heat sinks into scrap, but everything else was working, Jincho said as he nodded in approval and his tail swayed contently behind him. Got a chance to tinker with it, too. Managed to recalibrate the fuel and thrust systems and reroute excess stress and heat away from the core and into the engines. And your directional thrusters are also better now. Your fighter is now 7.2% faster than before. You can carry half as much coil gun ammunition, and your shields are a whooping 3% stronger now. Had to sacrifice redundant systems, but hey, who cares, right? So, Wormbrain, how do you like your new fighter? You may thank me now. Wyatt smiled widely. Does anyone know what you did to it yet? He asked, barely able to keep the tremor in his voice at bay. If I did, they wouldn't have let me tinker with that beauty of a fighter. Principality regulations can be so anal about it, I'd rather choke on my feathers than deal with that shit. But you, Wormbrain, you know your stuff. I can't see your eyes, but I know you like what you see, eh? Fighting fair is for losers and soon-to-be corpses, Jincho said, extremely proud of himself. More than ever before, Wyatt decided he would stay in Jincho's good graces. Dropping to a knee, he bowed before the surprised Ikanti. Thank you, Master Technician Jincho. I am most impressed and grateful for your work, he said solemnly, putting as much theatrics into his praise as possible. Jincho shuddered, and if it were not for the suit, his feathers and fur would be standing at attention at the compliment. Ha! See, you ungrateful bastards! A little recognition and praise go a long way to get what I can give, Jincho shouted as he threw a fist in the air. Clara has to know this. I'm certain she'll be happy, Wyatt thought.